Baseball and Whatever with your host, Justin McElwee.
Because I was on campus and I had to appear like I was one of the cool kids, I would put the Star Wars book inside one of my textbooks so it looked like I was just studying for class.
All right, look, there's only one return, okay? And it ain't of the king, it's of the Jedi.
Vincent Francis Jankowitz IV.
I'm a glorified fact checker.
Last I checked, the most runs in a game wins.
Actually, I am a fact checker.
And Greg Probst.
If you look at most Bond fans movie rankings, they have Casino Royale and Majesties in their top two. For me, these actually rank in the bottom part of my list. I mean, I love them, but they don't compare to Diamond Dust Forever.
No, stop getting Bond wrong!
Hey everybody, Justin here. Thank you for tuning in to the newest episode of Baseball and Whatever. The reason you are seeing and hearing me, depending on if you're listening or watching this on YouTube, for some reason, StreamYard decided to completely eat and garble up the first 3 minutes of our interview today. So let me just kind of preface what we discussed in the first 3 minutes before you guys get started. We are interviewing the one, the only, the amazing Andy Frye. If you are watching on YouTube, this is his book right here, 90 Days in the 90s. He is the writer, phenomenal book. If you are an 80s born 90s kid that loves 90s music, this is the book for you, especially if you grew up or live near Chicago like I do. Really hits home. It's a great book. But what we started discussing is, first of all, we talked about how you can reach the show, which you guys are familiar with if you listen to the show. And then next we talked about the first album I ever bought was Ace of Base, and then followed by Chumbawamba. And Andy starts talking about Chumbawamba. Tub Thumping, I believe, is 25 years old, like last week or so. So you're caught up to speed now. We will then go ahead and play into the rest of the video. The audio should be fine. Enjoy it. It's a great video, great audio, great interview with Andy. It was great to take some time with him and get to meet him, get to learn a little bit about his writing process. Check out his book. All right, enjoy the show. Yes.
Oh my God.
25-year anniversary like a week ago, and it's always been kind of one of those 90s pop songs, ever present in my mind. But it's like, wow, it's been a long time. I mean, I guess there were one-hit wonders in the 90s too.
They are,
Yep.
yes.
One of them.
They are.
So,
well, we can dive into one-hit wonders later, but for those of you that are listening on the podcast version, or if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, let me run through a little bit of Andy's qualifications, exemplary qualifications, I should say. He's the author of 90 Days in the 90s from Atmosphere Press. He is writing for Forbes. He's also formerly of ESPN, Rolling Stone, and the Chicago Tribune. You can find him on Twitter at Sporty Fry. He's got some great takes on there. I've definitely enjoyed following him on Twitter. Again, we are Baseball and Whatever. You can find us in a variety of ways. If you want to reach out or text us, you can reach us at 1-913-808-3278. You can find us at youtube.com/baseball and whatever, twitch.tv/baseball and whatever. You can find us on Twitter at baseball and what, and email the show at baseballandwhatever@gmail.com. All right, let's dive in. Andy, I think I originally came across you interacting with the Q101 Twitter account, which I am an unabashed Q101 fan. I remember growing up, finding that radio station in Chicago. Got a little disappointed when it switched over to, God, what were they at first before they became...
WKQX was the call.
Yes.
It was a news channel.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
And then, I don't know, was it easy listening music after that for 20 minutes? Then it found its way back slowly, I guess. But
so I saw you reaching out, and then I saw you had the book, and I'm like, holy cow, this is right up my alley. So I guess my first question for you is, how did the book exactly come about? The plot itself is pretty unique. I so far from, I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I wanted to finish it for tonight, but my daughter had other plans. But the premise of, Darby's this main character. She's an accountant. She goes to New York. Things don't go so well. I love the fact that you worked in that there was some issues with some Bitcoin transactions and some cryptocurrency, which we are not the biggest fans of. And then I could talk about how much I hate NFTs for the longest time. That could be a whole podcast. But how did you come up with this storyline? She discovers the gray line, also great reference to the L, and all of a sudden she's going back in time to relive her time in Chicago, in the 90s, and going to take her life in a completely different direction, so to speak. Granted, it's only for 90 days, but how did that even come about? How do you generate that idea?
Well, so I said one of the characters. So the Darby's best friend in the book. His name is Alex Spiro. You just call him Spiro.
Yep.
And he's kind of like, I mean, a lot of the people in the book, I don't like Darby's not me. It's not autobiographical, but, I lived through the 90s and I love music. And, when I was, I just kind of experienced a lot of the things that I think I wanted to talk about. So Spiro is kind of an exaggeration of a short story poet, writer friend of mine named Doug Milam, who used to live here. And he's up in the Pacific Northwest now. Mm-hmm. And we used to have this thing, like just randomly, we would just kind of, because it didn't make sense, we would say like, oh, we should, hop on the Yale and go to Woodstock this weekend. And we kind of played with the time space continuum in place of places to go. Like, this is like before the Bean and Millennium Park existed. It was like, oh, do we go to, let's go, we'll go here, we'll go there. If you've been in Chicago, like when you first moved to Chicago in your 20s, you probably know this, when you're broke and you're eating ramen noodles every night or quesadillas as your dinner, like you're not thinking about going to unless your parents are in town, they're going to pay, spring for you, pay for the bill. You're not talking about going to the bar at the Hancock or, spending like $12 your hard-earned money to go to the MCA. You'd love to, or like the architectural boat tour or anything like that. You're just trying to like rub nickels together and pay your rent and, wash your clothes and go see a show, go see, a band that you like. And sometimes you have to pay, nowadays $65, $70 to see a band. Or maybe you see a band for like $12, $13. So there was a lot of that just kind of bounced. Like, yeah, well, we should go to Nirvana's show, like Nirvana's first show. And I think I knew long ago, and I researched this for the book, that Nirvana's first ever Chicago show, at least that I know of, was 33 days after Smells Like Teen Spirit was released as a single. Wow. If you think about it, if you were at that show, you would just go see whatever band was at Metro anyway, or you were really in the know. Like if you saw Nirvana at Metro, holy crap, that's a great moment to think about. And, I've had some situation, like I went to the very last Grateful Dead show I'm not a Deadhead, but the last Grateful Dead show was July 9th, 1995. Jerry Garcia died 1 month to the day later. So the fact that I went to like my first show was the last Dead show ever with Jerry Garcia was like kind of cool. I didn't know that was going to happen, obviously, but I mean, when I was there, I thought, well, this is kind of like I don't feel like I'm a Deadhead. I don't want to like, feel like I'm in with the crowd. But I was kind of observing pleasantly. And I think there's a lot of that when you live in a big city and you're overwhelmed by how much there is to see and maybe how little time and space you have to experience all the stuff that people say you should do and should see. It kind of, you sort of become an amateur tour guide and you start telling people when you've been here for 3-4 years, like, oh, you need to go do this. You need to go see this. Like I've got a friend, another author friend of mine, Reading the Bass, who is from Portugal. You guys, this is a book written for kids, but you'll want to own it. It's basically a picture book that's rock and roll history. Ooh, and okay. I'll look at the title. I mean, the title is kind of escaping me now, but like I said, we got to meet at Peace tomorrow to get pizza at Peace. And she wants to go to she's in with her husband from Portugal. We're going to hit Reckless Records and do kind of like the whole rock and roll thing. So there's that piece of it. But as Darby goes, I was actually like one of my corporate jobs over the, my life was I worked at the Board of Trade. I dealt with traders who trade everything from like the Nikkei to pork bellies and stuff. And actually, Darby's a trader. She's not an accountant, but
that's right. I'm sorry.
She kind of makes a decision, as I think a lot of people in my generation did, like, working for this little newspaper or working at a bar is fun, but I got to get serious now and, do corporate job X. And then, some of us did, some of us didn't. And you kind of realize what really makes you happy and that work is work. And hopefully you find your way back and just, make sure you enjoy life and you don't get too buried in to, being a vice president or whatever, So I think she has sort of a midlife crisis and she's not really admitting it or not real with it, but all these things happen. The backstory on her is that her life kind of falls apart in New York. At the same time, her favorite uncle dies. He has an awesome record store in Chicago, and little does she know that he willed it to her. So then she moves back to Chicago, takes over the record store. She's got an apartment in the same building. And it's kind of forced to kind of like relive Chicago and also, get a chance to kind of get reacquainted with all the stuff that she forgot that she loved, that she left behind. And then, you're here and you start experiencing things and you get nostalgic and you realize what a great city it is and you want to explore more. And then, there's a time travel train, and lo and behold, I won't spoil too much, but there's a stop of the Gray Line under a record store, and she has a chance to travel back in time and decides to kind of just hit the 90s and experience it again.
Well, and I love too, like there's several references in the book where, just she kind of takes note of, no one's looking at, there's no cell phones to look at. People are just talking and conversing, and you're going to see concerts. And it almost made me, I didn't know I could really be nostalgic for a time period that, I was only, between like 10 and 15 in the 90s. And you don't realize how nostalgic you could be for that just because we are just inundated nowadays, whether it's social media or, 24-hour news. And, it was kind of nice to think back to, wow, yeah, people did live a little bit differently back then that, we kind of take for granted how it used to be. So I guess to weave in more with Chicago, you reference the Cubs, you reference, I love there's a line in the, yes, the Wiener Circle. Yes. You reference, there's a character on the, I believe it was on a bus at one point that, looks just like somebody from the 85 Bears. They got the mustache and the Ditka glasses and stuff like that. There's tons of references to Malort, which I have somehow luckily avoided ever having in my entire life so far. So I'm thankful for that. But, there's scenes that take place in Bucktown and in different neighborhoods throughout the city. But what made Chicago such a perfect setting? Because if I'm not mistaken, you're from Philly, right? So, what made you say, okay, I want to set this in Chicago? Was it because obviously, you've been here for such a long time now? Is it just because Chicago's more of it's a different style of city than maybe something like New York City where it could have been set there? But what made you ultimately settle on Chicago?
Well, I'm old enough. I could say that I've lived more than half my life here now. I moved here in the fall of '94. So, by the time I moved here in a music lens, Kurt Cobain was dead. Oasis was playing little shows in Wrigleyville and other, probably we're up at Madison or Grinnell, Grinnell College the next week. We were kind of not really sure grunge and indie rock and, music that involved people writing their own songs and playing their own instruments, Ace of Base notwithstanding.
No, you're right.
It wasn't the majority. But, you turn on, so I could turn, I was telling somebody the other day, like, I don't really hate Coldplay, but I know that I could turn on the radio right now and I can hear Coldplay.
Oh yeah, so, without a doubt.
Yeah, and there's kind of some pop rock bands like Imagine Dragons now that are kind of, here's our token band that actually plays guitar and here's a Drake song. Whereas you turn on the radio, there was more variety back then. You can turn on the radio and hear L7 and Alice in Chains and Sonic Youth and The Refreshments or like all kinds of bands. Citizen King or from Madison.
Oh gosh,
and I think it just, there's such a like when I first started writing this book, I didn't know how to write a book. I don't have an MFA. I didn't take any formal writing classes. I did do something that's very Chicago, and I took improv classes and I performed at Second City. And from that, you learn how to organically, at least I learned how to sort of create dialogue that was, organic and conversational, not what are we doing? And, it's so I just kind of rolled with it. And I thought, well, when I started writing the novel, I'm like, I got to get all this stuff in the novel. I got to mention all this stuff, but I didn't know what I was writing at first. But eventually, when you get your plot and the characters down, and I really felt like I wanted to hang out with the characters I created, sort of maybe because they're people who you would meet in Chicago in the '90s, who are into music. They're not, Chicago is a Midwestern town. It doesn't anger me at all, but I do think that Lounge Acts and Double Door, they're up there with the Whiskey A Go-Go and CBGB and
for sure.
The DC club or in DC, the 930 Club. Like I feel like they're in there, but they just, because we're in the Midwest, we don't really get the same billing. But I've known people who've seen Smashing Pumpkins in front of 12 people at Lounge Acts because that's what they were doing. So I think I just wanted to incorporate all those things as like real relatable experiences. And I've been here for more than half my life. And I think when I actually started writing the book June 1st of 2017, and I'd come up with the idea, I think during Easter, and I was at a friend's house in Michigan, and I was just kind of taking a break from doing some busy work, and I went for a walk, and I had all these playlists on Spotify that I came up with, and most of them were like, at the time, at least most of them were 90s music. And I just kind of revisited that idea, like, well, what if I could time travel back to the 1990s? Like, what the heck would I do? And what some of us writers do is we get an idea, and, you write it on a bar napkin, which is sort of the stereotypical story you hear about that. Or, you take a note of it, and you, at least for me, I think a lot of writers do this, is if you give a shit about that idea 2 weeks from now, it's time to do something with it. Whereas we all have stuff like, oh, it's a great idea. I came up with a great idea for a movie, or I should call up David Lee Roth. I got a great album, concept album for him. Let's team, like we all come up with this creative stuff. But then you've got to kind of pare it back, like what really makes sense and what can I don't want to bite off too much more than I can chew. What can I really do? And I kept thinking like, this is a really cool idea. I want to see what I can do with it. After writing sports writing type projects for so long, I think a lot of writers, we all feel like either we have a book in us or we want to see if we could write a book, if we could pull it off. And that was also the main thing too. So Chicago is just kind of a natural place. It's a big city where there's a great quality of life, great music, and also a little bit underrated for its music scene. And, to brag a little bit, we have, I'm not a huge NFL fan, but if we went single season, they've got the best football team of all time in the 85 Bears.
That's true.
Jordan's Bulls, I think, probably the second installment, were the best basketball team of all time. We can get in the nitty-gritty about pizza and how you have your hot dog and all that fun stuff. I mentioned in one of the chapters, like, there's Darby's kind of talking with her friend and like, why is the time machine, the gray line, only available in Chicago? Like, why not other places? And she kind of has this little spell in her mind where like, well, Chicago did invent the microwave and heart surgery. And we were across the river and we got the greatest football team and basketball team of all time. So like, of course, like, why would you need to go anywhere else? It's kind of like,
it just makes sense. Yeah.
With that mentality and maybe how dumb it is at times, but also how legit that, Chicago is a world city. And I don't know, it just felt natural. And I started running with it. And the more I wrote about the characters and the plot, it's more like I was hanging out with them, in my own mind back in the 90s.
Sure. It's definitely, granted not living as close, because I was literally across the street from Mount Greenwood growing up, but now living a little bit further away, and in the few times, not so much the last couple of years, just because everything's been crazy with the pandemic and everything, but those times where I get to go back downtown, it's almost like a Walt Disney-esque feeling, like, you don't realize what great thing you have literally, 40 miles from your front door that, people throughout the Midwest, especially in the flyover states, they don't have anything like that. I feel like I take it for granted. And then I see the skyline as I'm driving in, through Lakeshore Drive or, 57 into 9094. And it's like, man, this is just, there's so much history. There's so much action here, from a music standpoint, like you discuss in the book. I still remember going to see Smashing Pumpkins for the first time. Granted, I was a little bit later. I was in college. So this would have been maybe like their second or third reunion at Chicago Theater. And it was just incredible. I'm like, wow, here's this band I've been listening to since, sixth grade. And they started here. They got big here. Here they are. They're reuniting. I'm at Chicago Theater. I'm right by Lake and State. Like, what more could I ask for? It's just like you said, it's the perfect place to be. And I almost feel like the city kind of provides it like a character itself too, right? Like, it's the setting, yes, but there's also just this demeanor and ambiance and whatever other words you want to use to describe it, but it really exudes character, I think, in a certain way.
Yeah, and in 2000, so you were younger than me when this came out, but I remember hearing that High Fidelity was going to be made into a movie, because I had a couple of friends, kind of more acquaintances, but I knew, like, my friend Doug was like, oh yeah, Dave's going to he's an extra in High Fidelity. I'm like, well, we'll go see and point him out. And so we had two people we knew in the movie who were extras. Actually, one, there's a poet named Damian Rogers. I think she lives in Canada now, but at the time she was in Chicago. And so she's the girl in High Fidelity who's like, hey, is this the new Green Day? When they're in the shop, they're playing. So she was like, her role is a Green Day girl. I didn't really know her very well, but I knew like of her because, my best friend was a poet and I knew some like literary types, even though I was just trying to figure out what I was doing writing wise. So like little stuff like that I actually know people in the movie, and I could probably talk about trivia of that movie. But the fact that it took place in Chicago does have to do with John Cusack being from here. Yeah. But it also seemed like a perfect place beside, like, the book takes place in London, but it's a perfect place to have like a record store with, it's not the kind of record store that famous rock stars are going to walk into because they don't live in Park, Chicago, but who knows? There's always crazy zany stuff that happens, and rock and roll stuff that happens too. So for sure, that kind of gave Chicago a little bit of deserved, I guess, street cred in the music scene, and we have it forever now.
Excellent.
Nice. Well, I haven't read the book yet. Justin's the reader of the podcast.
Yes,
he can speed read anything. But I'm definitely going to have to pick up a copy because, it sounds very interesting and right up my alley. But since you're from Philly and you've lived, I guess, over half your life now in Chicago, I guess what are some of the differences between Philadelphia and Chicago? And I guess how did you end up in Chicago and kind of landed there?
Yeah, so I graduated college in '94, so it was a long ass time ago. But so in the mid '90s, before the stock market blew up and everything was golden, there was actually, a recession, and I knew people like, friends of mine who were older who like went to better colleges than I did, went to like Princeton, Cornell, who were back at home working for the Park District because there were no jobs anywhere. It's kind of the first, the part where I guess America broke from my dad's America, where my dad would be like, well, just go to Leo Burnett and bring your resume in and say you want to talk to the hiring manager to, if you have an appointment, you're not getting through the lobby and we're not hiring anybody right now who doesn't have, a couple years of experience. Like now people graduate from college, they have to go work at the Gap and Starbucks to get a job. It's your straight A student to get a General Mills job, or, it's more like that. And then add that in a recession. I just knew that I wanted to live in a big city. And I guess the caveat was that I knew a few people were getting jobs I heard in Chicago. And I was like, well, I'd love to live in a major city. New York's probably too expensive. LA was a million miles away. And I didn't want to live in a city where, like our NL rivals, St. Louis, they have to drive everywhere and eat second-rate pizza. I definitely wasn't going to do that.
That's very true.
Or like Tampa, or I could rip on cities all day. Like I had a friend who went to Charlotte. Charlotte's beautiful, a little too southern for me. So Chicago was kind of like, well, I've never been there. They got a YMCA. I can at least stay for a night and figure it out there. And then, it's like literally just kind of, visited some friends in Ohio and booked a bus, I think from Cincinnati, and came up here. And it's kind of like the movies. I didn't know what the hell I was doing and was walking around a lot, just trying to figure out where I was and applying for jobs. And I just, I guess I got some traction and I stayed and I liked it. I did. Chicago does have a great quality of life, and we can complain about, the mayor or the parking tickets or the construction or whatever. But if you can hack living in a big city, it's one of the best, I think, because everything's here. And it's, I guess thanks to climate change, it's not as cold anymore. There's not.
That's true.
We don't get negative 20 for 2 months like we did in '94 and '96. So that's, I just wanted to live in a big city, and Chicago was great. And Philly's great too. But Chicago actually was, I'm not a sociologist or urban planning expert, but it seemed like Chicago was the first of the cities that said, people want to live in the city. Daley was the mayor at the time and kind of figured out that we need to come up with a system of refurbishing the city to get people to move back to the city. So Chicago was kind of like the first one. And then, I'm hearing from friends back home that, people are like moving into Philly now. And I'm hearing the same thing about Kansas City and in Indianapolis, where when I was growing up in the 80s, the city was the inner city. Either if you were the son of a millionaire, you might live in Center City, Philadelphia, off of, I don't know, a Rittenhouse Square, and you go to private school. And then if you weren't, you were poor. And there was no reason to go to the city other than the museums or football game or baseball game. So major cities became much more livable. And I think I alluded to this in my book when Darby goes to Amsterdam, and she kind of has the same sort of realization, like that not all cities everywhere are skyscrapers named after insurance companies. There's a lot more there. And so the city started to evolve in the 90s to become more livable. And, I was here probably when that was starting to happen, and I definitely wasn't going to move home to the suburbs. So, and, Philly's great. I go back when I can. I think it's just Chicago's got a little bit better quality of life and a little bit more variety, maybe. Nothing against Philly. I'm more of an East Coast style pizza fan. However,
okay.
But deep dish is just something different. So I think that's not that's not worth arguing over, I guess.
No,
there's
just so much pizza, right?
So yeah.
I guess...
So and the Cubs, I'm primarily Philly sports fan, except for the Cubs. I root for the Cubs over the Phillies any day. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of leads me into my next question. And I know we had talked on Twitter. I know there's the one chapter, and I had read it actually like right around the time that you had reached out to us about it, where one of the characters is telling Darby about all these different Cubs games they went to go see, and you can go back here, you could 1969 or 1984, 1989. I think I would go back to 2003 and just cry all over again after that whole debacle, but we don't need to get into that. But I guess for you, like, obviously you got the Wrigley Field, marquee behind you. You mentioned you're more of a Cubs fan besides anything else as opposed to the Phillies. But what is it? Was it just a matter of moving here and just kind of being inundated by Cubs fans in the North Side and the Cubs in general? Or was there something that kind of allured you, I guess, to being a Cubs fan as opposed to a White Sox fan once you got here?
Yeah, I've written about this when I used to write for Tribune. I primarily wrote for the Red Eye, and then sometimes if I was lucky, if I wrote something good enough, it might show up in the Tribune on the main page. I don't know. I think it's just kind of grows on you. Like, I think probably the first couple of years, I'm thinking, like, Cubs suck. Why is traffic so bad? I can't park anywhere. They're not worth it. In 1994, 95, if you had a car in the city, you were stupid enough to bring a car into Wrigleyville or Lake. You had to just accept once or twice a month you were going to get a $40 ticket because you couldn't, or you'd have to park in Wisconsin and walk back to your apartment. I mean,
Right.
I lived on Clark and like just north of Diversey, and I would have to park all the way over at like Racine or Southport and walk. Like that's how bad it was until they rezoned it. So every once in a while, when you're getting back from work at 7:30 and traffic still sucks, and the Cubs game is either letting out or something, you're just like, all right, I'll just take a chance. And so, but you go from that to warming up to the neighborhood and kind of seeing how wonderful it is, whether the Cubs are good or not. Either you buy into the whole Sox thing that the Cubs aren't real baseball and they all eat brie and they don't care about sports and they're just there to, I guess, now take selfies and check in on Facebook and
make the what is it, the cup snakes? That's the rage all the days out in the bleachers.
We're just going to get free swag. And you realize you accept that or you realize that it's not true and that there's a real, nothing against the White Sox, but there is a real experience at Wrigley Field for, as much as you might be able to criticize it. Or, maybe I don't particularly like the Ricketts,
I'm right there with you.
Whole experience. It's weird. Every time for a while, every time I saw Cubs fans, friends of mine, take a picture with Tom Ricketts, I was like, why are they taking a picture with Ted Cruz? I'm like, oh, wait, that's not Ted. It's Tom Ricketts, but they look a lot alike.
Right. Yeah. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Yeah.
Ted Cruz is a little, obviously, he looks like he, is more constipated and pissed off and not friendly, but
also true.
They do look like they could be related anyway. So I don't know. I think it's just kind of hanging around. And it's actually that 2003 season. The Cubs used to have night and weekend packages. I don't think they have those anymore, but I bought, back when I was in the trading sector, and I had, I was making probably too much money for my relative age group. When I was 30 years old, I was like, I sprang for, I don't know, I felt it was like $1,200 for a bunch of tickets, and it was probably maybe 64 games or so. So I would go and be at Cubs games like 2 to 3 times a week, and that really, it's like being part of the club. And it doesn't matter whether they win or lose all the time, or you just kind of feel like a local and a regular, and that's important. I think probably every decent sports franchise, the ones that really have relationships with their fans, and there's scores of them in every sport, do that well and really know how to cultivate that. And I think the Cubs probably, I've never been to Lambeau, but I've heard even if you hate the Packers and you go to Lambeau, you feel like you're at Disneyland. Like there's an experience. They're very welcoming. The whole thing rules. And in the summertime, Wrigleyville and Wrigley Field is like that. And I think that there's kind of an emotional thing that happens if you are willing to accept it. And if you live here, that, the Cubs just become your team. You got to like baseball, I think, a little bit to really get more out of it than you would if you're not a baseball fan. But yeah, there's something emotional about the Cubs. And I think maybe all baseball fans feel that about their team. But I think we have something over like Detroit Tigers fans and Arizona Diamondbacks fans. I don't really feel like they experience the same sort of thing that we do, but I could be wrong.
I think, and Vinny, you can probably attest to this too. Like, obviously, on the podcast, I'm the one that always tries to sneak in hockey talk because that's what I grew up playing is ice hockey. And going to the United Center, Chicago Stadium, I very vaguely, when I was a kid, going there for like Disney on Ice and stuff. But going in the United Center, it's cool. It's a stadium, but there's some. I still remember and this is probably going to sound dramatic, but the goosebumps of coming out of that underground concourse and walking up into Wrigley, and it's just like, wow. There's something so special about this. Granted, there's parts of it, there's amenities of it I don't like, but it's, I've equated it to Vinny, what did I say? It was like your favorite dive college bar that's a complete dump, that you know it's a dump, but it's your dump, and how dare anybody talk badly about it, right? So it's I
think you bring that up. So in the book, I wanted to kind of experience that. So I'm not going to spoil too much, but the way that so the time travel mechanism, for anybody who doesn't know anything about the book, you see there's an L train on the front cover. You look over my shoulder if you're actually watching us. The time travel mechanism is called the gray line. And one thing that it's kind of to elaborate in the 90s, I remember the 90s also is everybody got email, everybody got a computer, So we started getting, within about a month of getting your own email address at work or on your own, you get urban legends sent to you, a list of like things that you didn't know, like 15 things you didn't know about this, and then the exiled Nigerian princess started contacting you, give you $400 million if you share your account info with them. So like the whole urban legend thing was big, and I wanted to play with that because I feel like it was sort of. I used to get chain letters in college, and I remember the first time I got an email that was the same chain letter, but it was emails like, really, dude? So there was that, and then so the gray line is the mechanism that Darby or anybody who knows about it can time travel all the way back to 1947, which is actually when the CTA was established. And there's rumors about it. Some say it was like scientists experimented with it. Some say it was like built and abandoned by the War Department. Some say it was like, the forgotten train line. And anyway, Darby finds it, and it does go to the 90s because the 90s were in the past. And, she's heard the urban legends as everybody else has, but, like the New Jersey Devil or the Mothman, we think it's BS.
Sure.
And then she's out with her friend one night. She's having a great time. Her friend has to call a night, and she's kind of lonely, and she just decides to go to this dive Cubs bar to watch the Cubs. First, she goes to Nisei Lounge, which is a real bar, and then she goes to
right outside. This pretty close to the stadium, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, right down the street from Wrigley.
Yep.
So she goes to this dive bar, just kind of across the street. One of those around the corner. It's like one of those bars that there's no name out front for the bar; it just has like an old style sign.
Yeah,
like,
But
they didn't bother to put the name of the bar up. So there's plenty of those in Chicago, and so she's talking to this, kind of crazy old man who's a Cubs fan, and they're watching the game, and he starts babbling about baseball, and he's like, "Yeah, I went to see Arrieta's hitter. I went to his no hitter against the Reds, the 16th season. I saw it 3 times." And she's thinking he's talking about like TiVoing it or something. He's like, "No, I went back in time and saw this baseball game," and she's thinking, "What the hell's this guy talking about?" Kind of lets on that the gray line legend is true, maybe. And kind of hears about it and just thinks, like, I'm becoming a local again. I'm hearing the great legends of Chicago. This is fun. Nothing serious over a beer. And then later finds out that the gray line is real and that she can take it back in time. And is nostalgic about the 90s, I guess maybe as I am, or any Gen Xer is a little bit, at least about the music. And then kind of makes a plan to like do a reboot of her life or a do-over. But kind of the subplot is that when she's back in the 90s, she's not dealing with her shit. She's actually having too much of a good time partying back in the 90s in the music scene. And she only has 90 days to either come back to the present or stay. And so that's a dilemma. It's kind of like, I think a lot of times as the three of us being men, we often see in movies that the men are the commitment phobes and the men have like sort of unresolved issues that we have. But in writing the book, I kind of wanted to be honest with that topic and thought, well, when I decided that Darby was going to be a female character, that, she can have that too. And that I wanted to kind of explore that anybody going back to another time, you can't time travel, obviously, but if you could, you might be perplexed about it. And sometimes in time travel literature and movies, it's all about saving the world or preventing this thing from happening or getting a lottery ticket. And I didn't want it to be about that. I wanted it to be about experiencing something a little bit more personal. So.
Well, nice. And I'm glad you brought that up because that kind of leads into another discussion point I wanted to bring up. I love at one point in the book she's writing she's working for this music she's writing a music column, and she talks about the idea of going back vintage concerts and doing vintage reviews, and she's using the gray line to go back to these famous dates where these initial concerts of these huge bands that were ready to break open. And being able to review them and then, put them in her articles and things. Is there one in particular? I mean, I was fascinated by that because it really got me thinking about all these concerts I missed out on, growing up, middle school, high school, before I started really getting into concerts and stuff in college. Is there one in particular that when you were writing that you kind of had in mind that you would like to go back and see if you could?
I don't know. The thing is, she experiences FOMO before FOMO was cool, I guess. I do remember when the House of Blues opened in Chicago, and I don't quote me on the date, but I feel like it was New Year's Day, 1996 or 97, that the first concert there was James Brown. And like obviously you couldn't get tickets.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
And I'm speaking now about James Brown still being alive and playing at this relatively small venue. I mean, holy shit! Like, proud House of Blues. Like, even if I'm in the worst seat in the house, that would be amazing. So there's some of that. I do remember the last show. I think the very last show, or one of the last shows, was Smashing Pumpkins did kind of like an acoustic, like an unplugged type thing at Lounge Acts. I think all the proceeds went to some sort of charity. I think it was like, it was like $600 starting to get in. You had to kind of know about it before it happened. Sort of like when Metallica played at Metro, I don't know what, a couple months ago. And it was like, oh yeah, Metallica's playing Metro. Did you get tickets? No. No. There's a lot of those, but there's I remember at Lounge Acts, one of my favorite bands of the 90s in 94, 95, there's a band called the Spinanes, and actually the drummer from the Spinanes built a spill. They've got two really great albums. They're on Sub Pop Records, at least they were. Now they're on Merge Records. And I love this band. And I remember thinking like, they're not that big. I'm just going to go over to Lounge Acts. And I was standing in line when it sold out. Like, it wasn't a matter of someone leaves the bar, I can go in. It was like, you're not getting in. Sorry, you're number 8 in line. And I thought, well, this is my only chance to see this band that I thought nobody else liked but me. There's plenty of that. And yeah, so I think there's probably 50 of those that I could get back to you on someday if you want. But
sure.
I think the point is that there's a kind of a momentum for music fans that there are those things. And Darby tries to, when she's thinking about doing this, where else should I go back in time? Now that I'm back in time, I could jump back on the gray line. She kind of hits up she's got a roommate actually, a little guy named Rod, who's like a James Bond obsessive film school grad.
I was immediately thinking of our co-host Greg when I read that about him.
He's trying to have this conversation like, hey, if you could go back to like the golden age of movies, like what movie set would you want to, be there for? And it's not really the same thing. I mean, it's like concerts, I think, like we all probably have our favorite concerts. I remember watching, so I grew up in Philly. I remember in 1985 watching Live Aid on my TV. My parents weren't into me. They would never have taken me down to JFK Stadium for Live Aid. It wouldn't even remotely been on the radar, and I would think I was 13 then. So yeah, but it was happening in my backyard basically. Like all the best bands in the world, and even Phil Collins played in London and flew with the Concorde.
And then flew back.
Philly.
Wow.
I was into Judas Priest at the time, and I was so excited that they played at high noon. Judas Priest was like the 4th band at Live Aid, like after Joan Baez and Billy Ocean or something. So there's tons of those, and I think that you're getting that informs sort of the excitement and the momentum behind Darby's feeling like she needs to do this. There is a lot of kind of like a dazed and confused ethic where she just goes back to the 90s and kind of hangs out for a while, but then she has this ability to jump on the gray line and time travel elsewhere, maybe not to look for a better existence, but to like experience stuff like you would at an amusement park. There's that piece of it. I guess time travel kind of makes the locations like an amusement park, I guess. And that's just sort of how it happened.
Well, and I love the aspect of, okay, she's got you reference about how it looks like an old Apple iPhone, or not, I'm sorry, not iPhone, Apple Watch or something like that, to relegate how many days she has left. And there's this kind of like back and forth, not subconsciously, but in her head that, okay, well, I could go do this, I could go do that, but okay, well, I've wasted the last 3 weeks just getting to see my roommates again from back in the day, and like you said, partying, going to bars, going to see shows, and stuff like that. And then there's that realization, okay, I need to figure out, what am I going to do with my time here? Which I loved that, because it kind of put some pressure on her, but it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't this, oh my gosh, I have to save the world. It's just this, how am I going to relive these times, and what am I going to do differently this time, as opposed to leaving Chicago for New York, for that trading job that she does in the real world, I guess you could say. But so I think you nailed it there. God, I can't even imagine being that close for Live Aid. But
well, that piece of it, like the 90-day timer, I worked after I maybe done my second or third draft. I had a friend who's a literary agent who said, you got some good ideas here, but you're not ready. Hire what's called a developmental editor. So I hired this woman who had just rolled off from a publisher. I think she got sick of commuting to Naperville and was just kind of going to do the editing thing. So she was great. Her name was Grace. And I basically hired her to sort of read my book and come up with suggestions. And it was, my generation grew up and thinks very much in terms of like a cinematic way. We think of movies and TV clips to tell stories. And she's like, so I'm thinking of Die Hard when, this is, or like a show like 24, where it's like, if she can just kind of come and go as she pleases, time traveling, and there's no like pressure, then it doesn't really make for a good compelling story. If you are the hero and you have to defuse a bomb, it's not just whenever you get around to it. It's like you've got, I'm thinking of also like the MacGruber skits on SNL. You've got 3 minutes or 24 hours or some time limit to do this, and you've got to use your time wisely, and that heightens the action. And sort of as a writer, it forced me to kind of make some choices and decisions and not be wishy-washy about, oh, well, maybe she will think this, maybe she will do this or not. It's really like, she has to make some decisions here, and there's outcomes to those. And I think we all know that, if we don't show up to work one day or decide to, walk blindfolded out in the expressway, there are consequences, and there are things that happen if you do those things. So it's the same thing as if kind of know what you're doing, what you want. There's always outcomes to things. And the editor really helped me kind of come up with what are the outcomes of her going back to the 90s. And then for 90 days, it just kind of sounded catchy too. So the constraints help, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Without a doubt. Excellent.
Nice. So you've interviewed some pretty interesting bands: Smashing Pumpkins, Oasis, Jimmy Eat World, Rage Against the Machines, Alice in Chains. Is there one interview where you had an expectation going in about maybe the band, and it was like completely different doing the interview, and they just came off completely different from what your expectations were?
Yeah, there's one. So most of the time I had a stint covering what I would call aging rock stars in their sports anchorings for ESPN for a while, which is kind of a cool gig. It first started out with Billy Corgan doing his wrestling league. And I actually just saw something on Instagram today, like he's restarting a new wrestling league called NWA. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's like New World Alliance. So he was doing the wrestling thing, and I covered that. And I kind of was like, well, what else is out there? So most of the time I talked to them, this is before Zoom, I talked to them on the phone for like 10 or 15 minutes. Not a long time, but I keep it conversational. And one of the people that I did not interview, but I emailed questions, I thought I was going to get blown off, but it didn't, was with Morrissey, Morrissey from the Smiths.
Really?
The beloved and hated Morrissey. And so I emailed a bunch of questions, not loaded ones. I didn't get personal, but asking about like sports related things. And so I asked these questions. You give me like detailed answers, but not answer the question. So then the article became about that. So I wrote this for ESPN probably about 10 years ago. I remember it was in January. I was like, got the email. I was getting tires put on my car, and I went to a cafe, and it was like dumping snow outside. I'm going through his answers. I'm like, he didn't answer any one of my damn questions, but he gave me good answers. I remember, like, if you Google the article, it's I think the first line of the article basically is like Q&A. It's not a Q&A, it's an interview piece with Morrissey, sort of about his new tour at the time. And it was like, I think the line is, Stephen Patrick Morrissey is considered an international man of mystery. So I asked him, there's a rumor that he's from Manchester. I want to know if he's a Man United fan or what. Or someone said that he liked Millwall, and supposedly the story was that he was friends with somebody who was a staff at Millwall, and then they gave him a shirt, and I think he wore the shirt somewhere in LA. So people were like, "Oh, Morrissey's a Millwall fan," and then he said that there were rumors about that he'd bought the club. It's like a South London second division club, kind of like buying the Iowa Cubs, I guess. So he didn't answer this, except for that one. He didn't really answer the question. So the article became about that, and it was actually turned out really well. So, and then my editor at the time, Dave Wilson, who I think he after that he went on to ESPN the magazine. He's just a really great editor at ESPN. He found a picture of Morrissey wearing a West Ham United shirt, which is like Millwall's arch rival. So it just played into the whole like, maybe you know me, maybe you don't. Maybe I'll answer your questions. Maybe I'll give you a different answer. It just played in the whole dynamic, which is kind of very Morrissey. I got a great, short piece out of that just by asking questions he didn't answer. And, for not getting to talk, he doesn't really talk to many people. I think Jonathan Ross and maybe Graham Norton on BBC America, like the only two people who would get an interview with him. So I was lucky to get an email interview through his press agent in New York at the time. But yeah, it made for a great article, and I didn't know what to expect, but man, he's an interesting dude, whether you like him or not.
Everything I've read about him is very, very interesting, very unique. So I'm not surprised that you got an email with unanswers to your questions or not answers to your questions. But speaking of Morrissey and, the 80s and things like that, I feel like that wave of 80s nostalgia is starting to die down a little bit. The 90s tidal wave is coming. With the 80s, we've had Stranger Things and Cobra Kai remakes, and they're making a Drago Rocky movie now. Apparently it's Drago's side of the story, or Drago's son. I can't remember which it was, but for me, like that 90s nostalgia wave that's coming and going along with your book, for me, it really resonates, because that's when I found music and I got into sports and video games. And I mean, I could talk 90s athletes all the time. I couldn't tell you half the players in the MLB now, besides the Cubs and the NL Central. But do you think there's a reason that, not so much for the 80s, but now that we're hitting that 90s wave, like I said, do you think there's a reason that that's so relevant again? Is it just a nostalgia wave for people, Vinny and I's age, that's what we grew up with, and now we're the ones that, have a little bit of disposable income, so people are marketing directly to us? Or is there something more to that, do you think?
It could be. I don't know if I believe in the whole planned obsolescence thing, that there's, a bunch of marketing execs who said, okay, decide on October 15th of 2022. Okay, that's, we're going to do the 90s thing, and we're going to sell a shit.
Sure.
That may be. But so, like, going back to the 90s, so the Beastie Boys' second album, Paul's Boutique, actually came out in 89. They were doing something unique and ahead of their time, when everybody was either doing gangster rap or trying to do gangster rap. And then the other hip hop group from the time that was kind of doing something unique was A Tribe Called Quest, and they were doing like a jazz influence thing. So they both kind of touched on 70s music, and it took a couple years to catch on, but I know fast forward to like 97, 98, 1998, all of a sudden you're turning on MTV and there's these compilations for like the 70s hits and Disco America that you can buy, and like the K-Tel records that would come out where they have all the disco hits, but they're kind of in easy listening instrumental form. They were coming out again. There used to be a bar in Chicago called Polyesters, which I think they had a pretty nice weekend crowd anyway, but just was like packed. You couldn't get in. You'd go to thrift shop and buy some bell bottoms, and you'd wear it. You look like an idiot walking around downtown Chicago in February with bell bottoms on, waiting to get into this club so you can dance the 70s hits like everybody's doing now. So I feel like it's cyclical, and I think it's the generation that is kind of, getting back to my thing about, like, rubbing nickels together and eating ramen noodles every night, to having some disposable income and being like, I really love this. I want to buy this set. I want to, experience this music again. It's sort of primed to be the 90s turn. I think we're a little overdue, but
sure.
Stranger Things and a lot of TV, I think, influences it. I would suspect if they put out an episode of Stranger Things and they put a Nirvana song, or like any of the 90s bands, and what's the other? Lucifer was a pretty good series that actually had great music, wasn't all 90s music. When you kind of throw that in there, like what we just saw with the Kate Bush thing blowing up. Like, I think there's people who didn't even know didn't know Kate Bush was a singer until a month ago. And, one song on an episode that's kind of catchy, I'm glad. I'm hoping she's making some money off of it and, having a nice little boon period. But I think we revisit things that are good. That's the cool part about Western culture, I guess, in Americana, is that there's enough quality art and music out there that when you reach for something old a second time, it really resonates with people. And we can also look at all the bad music from the 80s too. Like, I don't know why we built this city by Starship was a number one terrible song. I mean, I like the Jefferson Airplane before the band changed its name, but there's a lot of bad songs from the 80s. But I was just having a conversation with, like, there are some great pop bands from the 80s, like the Smithereens and Huey Lewis and the News, and Duran Duran is great pop, and Cyndi Lauper and the Go-Go's. Like, these are bands that also wrote songs and played their own instruments. And there's more of that in the 90s. I think it's just there's going to be some flick of the switch, either like a TV episode or a remake of something, or maybe, I don't know. An old band drops a good album. I remember when Neil Diamond's good 90s album came out, and I think Dylan did a good 90s album, and that kind of brought back the 60s and 70s thing again. There's all kinds of reasons it could happen. I think the 90s sort of being mainstream again is seems like it's a long time coming, but I hope
Sure.
so. I mean, I hope it's right around the corner, or it happens tomorrow. Who knows?
I can't even tell you how many times I've heard the Kate Bush song this week just driving to work on radio. It's crazy. I'm happy for her because obviously I'm hoping that's helping. Whether it's I know Spotify listens doesn't pay the bills, but I kind of felt bad. I think it was Meg Myers, I believe, did a cover of that song like 2-3 years ago, and I had heard it on like Top 40 radio a couple times, and nobody made a big deal, and then here comes Stranger Things with the original, the Kate Bush version, and it just blows up all over again. So it's crazy to see how just something as awe-encompassing as a streaming show can really kind of change the dynamic when it comes to music. But
remakes are. I mean, I remember when a couple of years ago, Lana Del Rey redid the Sublime song.
Yes,
in time, and
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I think she did a really great job with it. And so I saw Sublime at Riot Fest last year, and it was cool. I mean, obviously Bradley Noel's been dead for 25 years now. I mean, it was a lot of white people doing this in the crowd, but it was fun. And there are some good songs. I mean, I don't think their body of work is like Led Zeppelin or anything, but they got some really great songs from the one or two albums that they put out that are really like I hear. What's that song that What I Got? I mean, there's something about that.
Yep.
Seeing the dog in the video, I just kind of brings back memories and pulls at the heartstrings a little bit.
I'm still partial. Bad Fish is my favorite Sublime song. I don't know why, but I had the chance. I'm still kicking myself. My wife and I were out in Denver about 2-3 years ago, and it was Red Rocks. It was Sublime with Rome, and we were, him and Haw, and we ended up not getting a chance to go see them. But I'm like, oh, that would have been, seeing a concert at Red Rocks, I think would be really, really cool. But yeah. So
Nice.
yeah.
Well, Andy, you've also not only interviewed interesting musicians, you've also interviewed interesting athletes. Tom Brady, Tracy McGrady, Lindsey Vonn, Jenny Finch, and Derek Jeter as well. So I guess my question would be is what has been your biggest takeaway with these athletes, and what makes them both successful like on the field and then I guess out of it? Because Tracy McGrady is doing he's got his own one-on-one basketball league, and what is it? Derek Jeter's also been.
He's got his hands in everything. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. Right now.
I think the thing is, I kind of always challenge myself and maybe get off in a little bit. Like I'm going to talk to these world famous athletes like a regular person. So, I always disliked sportscasters like Jim Gray that stick a microphone in someone's face and try to ask somebody, a question to get a certain angle or like to, I hate that. My favorite sportscaster was Dick Chapp because he could be conversational, was genuine with everybody. So I'm no Dick Chapp, but I try to, and writing for a business magazine for Forbes, I get to talk about whatever their business thing is. So they want to talk about that. But the main thing is, I think, just being genuine. They're no matter how famous they are, they're professional, and the best ones want to be seen as professional. But there are people too. They've got families, they got dogs, they got things that they like and love, and little quirks that we have, and they stub their toes and have bad days too. And I think it's just a matter of talking to a person like their person, and I think that's served me well. And I've built a nice, steady relationship with a handful of PR firms and publicity firms, and so they kind of come to me when they have somebody interesting. A lot of times I have to say no, thank you. I can't interview everyone. I only do about 5 to 6 pieces a month for Forbes, and they're mostly like Q&A things focused on an athlete and whatever their business thing is. But it's been a fun thing to have an opportunity to talk to all kinds of different athletes who are legendary. I remember probably the first famous athlete I talked to was Matt Forte, back when he was with the Bears. I want to say this was probably 2013. I remember it was a bye week, and it was bye week of the last Trestman year, and literally the next week they played the Packers, and everything went in the toilet after that.
Oh yeah,
it was a terrible season after that. But I got him before that happened. It was a beautiful day out. It was like a Thursday. Went up to Hallis Hall, and Matt Forte was doing a web comedy series with a couple of improv guys and Wes Welker and a few other players called Tough Season. And the plot of Tough Season was like, imagine you and me, the three of us, and like Gronk and Kyler Murray, and we're all in a fantasy football league, and we're super hyper competitive about it. and they're like playing football on teams, but they're also picking their fantasy. So it was kind of like a quirky bedfellow thing with the whole fantasy football and the hyper competitiveness and people trying to outsmart each other. But so Matt Forte is kind of chill. He's like a understated sense of humor, and he was really laid back and kind of soft spoken, and just kind of got to roll with him. And I'm a lot more talkative than he is, so I didn't want to like scare the guy. But I'm like, just tell me about your sense of humor. Like, you don't seem like you're really loud, but obviously you got something there, and tell me what it's like to roll with these loudmouths and these pro comedy guys. And he told me about it. And it's just like, yeah, I'm just when they think that I'm sitting there quiet, I don't have anything to say, I just bang, I got a funny line, I hit them with it, leave them dumbfounded or something. So not everybody is of his personality. There are a lot of headstrong, in your face people in sports. I've never had anybody be a jerk to me, I don't think, but I also am very respectful. Excuse me. So yeah, treat people like they're normal people and everyday people, and don't get too like personal cozy with them. But sometimes you ask a question and you'll get a great answer. You just open-ended question like, what made you do this, or how do you feel about this, or how do you prepare for this type of this championship? And they'll tell you. They'll tell you what they want to tell you, and usually there's good things there.
Excellent. Nice. All right. Well, before we get you out of here, I know we're coming up on the end here. We always, whenever we are lucky enough to have an interview, we like to do like a quick hit segment at the end where we do some rapid fire questions. If you're game for that, first thing that pops into your mind, let us know, and then we can go from there. All right. First one: favorite Cubs player of all time.
Oh, geez, it's weird. I kind of think of my least favorite Cubs player of all time first. I think of my least favorite Cubs player of all time is Kevin Tapani after the fifth inning, because he's a great. Great pitcher to the fifth inning, and then he'd put 15 people on base.
That is accurate.
I don't know. I have a kind of a fetish for like middle relievers and closers. I'm just kind of fascinated with that gig. However, like every time the Cubs get a good closer, he's gone like a season later. So I never really got to like kind of get into it with Wade Davis. Or I actually have I have a Chia Pet, which is a certain it's Craig Kimball Chia Pet.
Holy cow!
I think I actually got this Wrigley. I showed up early enough to get the Chia Pet. So I don't know, but let me just say Ryan Dempster because of his personality. I think
that's a safe one.
All kinds of different roles. He's obviously nowhere near a Hall of Famer or anything like that, but he kept us entertained. He was always positive, even when the Cubs were terrible and complete on the field. And you got to hand it to him for that, I guess.
I like that. That's a nice. That's a good answer. All right, here's another one. This could be any time period. Favorite band or musician of all time?
Well, it depends on how I feel and which way the wind is blowing. But because I've got two of their posters on my wall, I'm going to say the Stone Roses. The Stone Roses are the seminal Manchester band. Pretty much there are people who don't know who the Stone Roses are, and if you're an Anglophile, you definitely know who they are, and you know all their songs. And they were so their first album came out in '89. If you're not familiar with the Stone Roses, maybe you are, but if you're not, you need to go listen to them. Great songwriters, great band. They were supposed to be the next band in the world from England, and they just kind of were fighting with the record company, couldn't get it together. They're they're brilliant and lazy. They just kind of didn't give a shit too much about like following through with their career. And they got back together in 2016. We're supposed to put together an album, put out 2 singles, toured in Europe. Next thing I know, in Wikipedia, it says Stone Roses was a band from Manchester. I'm like, oh, really? Thanks for letting us know, guys, that you broke up, kind of. The Stone Roses are amazing. If you've never heard them,
I will check them out. I will definitely check them out.
Yeah. They're basically precursor to, the best bands from England, like I don't know. You may hate Oasis, but Oasis took a lot from them. There's just they influenced a generation of musicians from Manchester while also doing their own unique thing. So Stone Roses, nice.
All right. What about to dive back into the '90s? Favorite '90s song of all time?
There's
so many. I know. Yeah.
Changes
on the day.
So I have the opinion that the '90s musically started with Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, obviously. And I feel like the 90s ended with the song by Len called Steal My Sunshine.
I love that song. Unabashedly.
Yeah. So to me, I think it came out in 99, the summer when the movie Go came out. It's a great, maybe it's just what I was feeling at the time, but it was like a great, like I kind of knew the 90s was going to end. The boy bands were starting to pop up. Britney imitators, and all their imitators are starting to pop up and dance with barely any clothes on stage. And I was like, the songwriting thing and the grunge thing, the indie thing is kind of going by the wayside. And this funny little pop song that references, it's got a clip from a 70s disco song, actually. And it's a little hip hoppy and a little alternative. Just kind of like, I feel like it summed up the 90s in 3 minutes and was a great look back at how great the decade was. So I'm going to go with that because that is a very underrated 90s song. And it's, one of the best.
Nice. That is the video for Steal My Sunshine. I got way into music videos in my teen years, but that video for me is like quintessential. I think they're at like was it like a Jersey boardwalk? They're having a good time. They're going down like the boulevard of whatever city they're in, and I'm assuming on the East Coast, and
Daytona, actually, yeah.
Was it really Daytona? Okay, I did not know. That's good to know.
They went to Daytona for spring break.
Okay.
And they rent a bunch of scooters and drive around, do their video on it. Great stuff. So
oh God, I love that video. I love that song too. All right, I think I know what your answer is going to be for this one. Favorite '90s movie?
Well, there's a couple.
Okay.
You think I was going to say Days Confused?
I thought you were going to go either Days Confused or High Fidelity. That's what I thought you were going to go with.
Well, High Fidelity technically came out in 2000.
Oh, that's right. Technically, it was 2000. That's right.
Days Confused, Pulp Fiction. Favorite reboot actually was the Brady Bunch movie because it totally threw me for a loop.
I forgot about that one. Is that a very Brady sequel too?
These idiots lost in the 90s who are completely clueless as to what's going on. Great.
Yes.
I made my kid watch that. He was like, I don't want to watch this movie. I'm like, no, you're going to like it. In terms of the zeitgeist, I would have to say Days Confused, especially since it was an indie production. Nobody knew anything about Linklater. It was I guess promoted by it was Gramercy Films and maybe eventually Miramax. And then, but like it's still relevant today. And all the people who we didn't know who the hell they were, didn't know who Ben Affleck was, didn't know who I don't know, Parker Posey was. Who else is in that movie? A bunch of people.
There's a lot.
I mean, there's
Matthew
people
McConaughey.
Yeah, McConaughey.
McConaughey, of course. I mean, he's won an Oscar. Come on. All those people in that movie, and there's not really a plot. I mean, there's a plot, but there's not really a plot.
Yeah,
and they're just they're hanging out in the 70s. But that was, I think that's just it's such a unique movie, and I love that movie so damn much. So I'd say Days Confused.
Excellent. Good choice.
Nice.
All right, I got 3 more for you. This one kind of goes back to, I know we talked a little bit about deep dish earlier. Are you a Giordano's guy, a Lou Malnati's guy, or a Pequod's guy? Or is there some other smaller chain or smaller mom and pop pizza place that you're a fan of their deep dish?
Giordano's is reliably good. It's kind of like of the major ones, it's the one that I know I'll go to. I don't dislike Pequod's and Lou Malnati's. I actually hadn't had Lou Malnati's till about 10 years ago. I just kind of was a late bloomer on that. But I actually like Eduardo's. Eduardo's, they have a pesto pizza so they grow their the spinach in the restaurant sometimes. So it's like fresh. The pesto's mixed in with the cheese, so it's like really oozy and oozes grease basically, like in a good way, or olive oil, I guess. And I love green olives in my pizza, so I'm like that and green olives, salty as hell, great stuff. Yeah, Eduardo's is probably the underrated one. But so in terms of the big hitters, I would, I don't know. It's a toss up between Lou Malnati's and Giordano's. They're both, they're different, but they're great.
Yeah,
I'm torn on that.
Lou's was one when we used to go to Taste of Chicago. That was like the big get for us because we didn't have a Lou's anywhere near on the south side until it kind of blew up a little bit. There's one in New Lenox now. There's one in what would it be, Naperville, I believe, and that's more further northwest. But all right, I got 2 more. Second to last one, penultimate one. Best Chicago concert venue.
Well, it's still open or of all time.
We go either way. Your call.
I love seeing the small shows at Lounge Acts, and I'm actually like on Facebook. I'm part of a group called I Miss Lounge Acts. Occasionally, I'll post my stuff there. Like, hey, I mentioned Lounge Acts in my book. Buy my book. Like, not quite that. But I remember just seeing, like, I saw Rocket from the Crypt there for free. I think it probably 97. I go in, I'm waiting to meet friends, and Peter Buck from REM is standing there. Now, REM played that night, so I think what happened at what was called the Rosemont Horizon back then, now it's Allstate Arena.
Yep.
I think the concert ended, and he hightailed in a cab to get to Lounge Acts to see this free show by Rocket from the Crypt, which they took an hour to get on, and then they all come out in their matching like sequin bowling shirts, freaking awesome, man. And like I saw Peter Buck, and I'm going to go over and say hello. I'm not going to bother. Like, hey, great to meet you. I just wanted to tell my friends I met you. Cool. And he looked at me like, who the hell are you? So many great shows at Lounge X, but I think as they exist right now in terms of what is still open, I mean, Metro is a theater, but it's a great venue. Mm-hmm. However, I've never been to Sleeping Village. I'm going there later. Yeah, next month there's a band called Mama. They're from LA. They sound a lot like Veruca Salt, and it's
okay.
I think these girls are like 19 or 20 or 21. They're pretty young, freaking great band. I'm going to go see them. It's cost me $13. So I've never been to Sleeping Village. So I'm going to see if that's, an impressive venue because I've never been there. But now there's all kinds of, there's like the Chop Shop and Subterranean's great. Like I don't know. I can't really pick one. I think Metro's kind of I don't like going to big venues like stadiums.
No.
So I would say Metro, but I think there's a couple other I got to check off my list before I can really distinctively say, because I'm no expert on this, but I'd say Metro right now.
I just assumed it was getting older, but we are 20 minutes from what is it called? I don't Vinny, you would know if you're not from around here, but I think is it First Midwest Bank Amphitheater in Tinley Park now. It used to be the Tweeter Center, was originally World, whatever. Yeah. And that's kind of just been our go-to because it's so close, but I don't know if it's just because I'm getting old and I'm turning into like that get off my lawn type of guy, but I like the more intimate, smaller venues. I don't need a bunch of, kids that showed up because tickets were cheap and they're going to listen to this band even though they have no affinity for them. My wife almost got into a fight with a bunch of teenagers at a Blink-182 concert because she was upset that they were there, and she's like, no, they were annoying as hell, and she's like, you don't know this music. She was really unhappy about it. Yeah. You weren't even alive when we were listening to Damn It, like that kind of thing. But all right, last one for you, and this goes back to, the reference of the gray line and the L in the book. Either tell us your best or, I guess, technically worst L experience if you have one.
Oh, I got a great one for you. It's funny that you brought this up. So we all know who Ronnie Woo Woo is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, again, my memory's trying to serve me. I'm 50 years old now. So I believe I was coming back on the L. I was underground on the Red Line. It was February. And I see, so there's some street musician playing a violin. He's playing like a fiddle, kind of a, like a bluegrass type of song. And Ronnie Woo Woo shows up like in uniform with his Cub uniform. And he's wearing a Santa hat. And it's not December, by the way. And he's clearly drunk or buzzed. And he's dancing like, this is like at like State and Monroe or whatever the stop is. And he's like getting down and, like doing the jungle boogie and, dancing drunk to this guy who's playing a fiddle, just trying to, get some people to throw coins in his hands. Yeah, that would probably be the one that, every time I think about Ronnie Woo Woo, I think about that one. So I guess he went in his Cubs uniform without a coat in February and then ended up on the Red Line, and he just did a little dance for us. It was really bizarre, but very Chicago too.
Wow. Yeah. I think I'd be speechless. I don't even know what I would say or think at that point, but well, Andy, thank you so much. Would you like to just kind of tell everybody where they can get the book, where they can find your stuff? I know you got your website and your blog as well. Go ahead and share whatever you'd like to share with us. Yeah, so 90 Days in the 90s is out. It came out in June. You can go to 90daysinthe90s.com with 90 days in the 90s.com if you want. That's direct from me. The artist gets to keep more of the money there. If you want to buy from me, I'll send you some swag and I'll sign the book for you. Otherwise, you can also get it. You get it on Amazon. Barbara's Bookstores downtown has a couple, and if you're in the cool neighborhoods, you can stop by Reckless Records. Has a couple copies up on Belmont and also in Wicker Park. Rattleback Records actually has some copies up if you're in Andersonville. But it's 90daysinthe90s.com or any place you would buy books or maybe records. And other than that, you can check out my sports writing at sportyfry.com. That's Fry with an E. And I post about 5 articles a month there on Forbes. And luckily, they're mostly with cool athletes that you might have heard of. Excellent. All right. Well, Thank you so much. Again, this is Baseball and Whatever. Feel free to reach out to us again. You can text us. You can email us. You can tweet us. All those things. We would love to hear from you. Tell us what you think of Andy's book if you pick it up and read it. Vinny, I believe next week is version 2 of Musical Mayhem, correct?
That is correct.
And if you do not remember, we will be picking random artists, random groups, and trying to find a song of theirs that we enjoy. The goal was to try and get me to branch out of 90s and early aughts alternatives. So I believe, Vinny, you pulled randomly. We have Neil Young, Nirvana, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Buffett, and Bono Bo, who I believe was more of a lo-fi musician, right? Lo-fi like sound, background music.
Musical.
So write in, let us know your favorite songs of theirs. I'm already dreading listening to Jimmy Buffett this week. But anyway, I digress. Andy, thank you so much for your time. We will be back next week with baseball and whatever. Everybody have a great weekend, and take care, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks, man.